the events of World War II to the finish. We're not going to get to the finish today, but let's at least get rolling. We talked about Hitler at the beginning of the war, invading the Rhineland, Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, Poland, eventually France. So the war is going, while at the same time he also signs the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, or you can say Russia. You can see here Hitler and Stalin, who represents the Soviet Union. Hitler and Stalin, who represents the Soviet Union. Hitler wants to conquer Europe, but he doesn't want to deal with the Soviet Union at the same time. So he tells the Soviet Union, look, we'll leave you alone. You leave us alone. I've got some stuff to do. And so they agree to a non-aggression pact. And so while they're not fighting right here, Hitler can do his other stuff. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. So we've already talked about Hitler invading Sudetenland, Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Next is going to be France, and this is a lightning war, and he just pretty much crushes France in a matter of, I think, a month it takes. Hits them hard with the new machinery, invades, and France pretty much has to give up. The only left standing Western democracy is England. So pretty much at this point, Europe, along with Europe is pretty much Hitler's, along with Benito Mussolini in Italy. They've conquered all of Europe. Now on the eastern side, they've got Russia, or Soviet Union, which they've got the non-aggression pact, but now it's really just the last man left standing is Great Britain. And so Hitler and the Nazis can pretty much unleash everything on them because they're able to just go right through France. You know, I'd say, why were they able to just go right through France? That's crazy, because if you remember World War I, the French, for the entirety of the war, heroically fought against the Germans and really never gave up ground and gave their lives. They were on the front lines. America came in late. England kind of came in at the same time, but France was there from day one until November 11th, 1918, constantly fighting. Well, because of that horrific experience, a generation of French people were changed. And you can read Intellectuals in Society by Thomas Sowell. He talks about this. I would recommend any book by Thomas Sowell. So here we go. Pacifism became vogue among the intelligentsia and spread into educational institutions. As early as 1932, this is years before Hitler invades, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England, said, France, though armed to the teeth, is pacifist to the core. After World War I, after that terrible, well, it wasn't defeat, they won, but it changed them so much. They hated war. They said never again. And there's nothing wrong with saying never again to war. And there's nothing wrong with pacifism. But to act like war will not happen, to prepare as if war will never happen, was a mistake. And so the schools taught the children not to believe in war. The schools taught the children to believe in peace. And peace is great. And pacifism is great. But you got to prepare for war, because imagine you're in a town. There's two houses in the town. One house are pacifists. They do not believe in violence. They do not believe in peace. The other house believes in whatever they want. Guess what? The other house is going to easily attack the pacifists and take their stuff. It's great to believe in peace, but you got to prepare for war. The French did not do that. The schools indoctrinated the people to be pacifists. And so when those children grew up and Hitler invaded, they got destroyed. The Blitzkrieg went right through it. So there's other factors too, but the will of the French people was not the same will that stood up to the Germans for almost 10 years in World War I. In World War I, in the trenches, with the gas, with the machine guns, with the tanks, with the barbed wire, fighting every single day. Now that changed the people, and the people taught the next generation that we should never do this again. And that's fine, but the unintended consequences of creating a generation of pacifists, when those pacifists grow up and Hitler invades, those pacifists get whooped pretty easily. And Hitler knew this. Hitler had prepared for this. Hitler planned for this, and that's just unfortunate. World War I was more of a battle of men, not really machines. Now, they did have tanks. They did have planes and barbed wire and machine guns, but they didn't use them correctly. They were still using old Civil War battle strategies. They were still using 19th century strategies of war with their new fancy machines. Now in World War II, that'll change. But in World War I, they're still, everybody's lining up and coming together. That's why you had the trench warfare. World War II is different. We have the machines, and we're going to use modern military strategies with those machines, and the Blitzkrieg would be a perfect example of that. So Hitler's pretty much conquered Europe. England is the last man standing. What's America going to do? What is our policy in this? So the battle for the Atlantic. At first, our policy will be cash and carry. Here it is. England needs supplies, but we don't want to ship the supplies over. The weapons, the machine guns, plane parts. We don't want to ship it over because the Germans are going to blow up our ships. We're trying to stay out of this. We learned our lesson from World War I. We don't want to get involved in another European conflict. So our policy will be cash and carry. First of all, let's just focus on the carry part. You got to come get it and you got to take it. We are not sailing into Atlantic, dealing with Nazi land or Nazi mines, dealing with bombings from Nazi submarines, dealing with the Nazi airplanes. Come get it. We're not getting involved. Second part, cash. We're not going to loan you money. You got to bring cash. If it costs $30,000, then you better have $30,000 or we're not going to sell it to you. Why is that? Well, think of it this way. If you come and we loan it to you and say, all right, just make monthly payments. If we allow England to do that, and then England builds up this giant debt. Imagine England owes us $100 million. American government, the American people, the American corporations are owed $100 million. And then it looks like, oh, guess what? Hitler is getting ready to take over England. It's that close. Hitler is going to crush England and put it into his country. When that happens, if Hitler is able to conquer England, that $100 million, you're never going to get it back, American corporations, American people, American government. That's why you don't loan money to them. You say, you're paying us it all right now because we don't know if you're going to be a country tomorrow. Eventually, we're going to move a little bit away from the isolationist stance to destroyers for bases. We're going to say, all right, well, we're going to take some of these destroyers over to you. We'll give you the destroyers, but because this is a risk, and we want to help you out, but it is a risk. You're going to give us bases in some of your empires around the world. You're going to let us set up American bases where we want. Meanwhile, England is getting blown up. The Queen's saying, hey, keep calm, carry on. Cool, great. There's a bomb over my head, but I'll do my best. And you can see here that Hitler has pretty much conquered it all at this point, minus Russia, which non-aggression pact there, and it's all eyes on Great Britain. The Nazis are able to unleash all of their hell and fury on Great Britain at this moment, and Great Britain's just trying to survive. They are in a bad spot, and the best thing we're doing is cash care. So we realize that, and so we will move slightly more away from isolationism and a little bit more to being less neutral, being more active in the war, and we're going to go with a Lend-Lease Act. So yes, we're going to get you the goods. We're going to lend it to you. We're going to loan it to you. I know at first we said we're going to have to make you pay cash up front, but now we realize that you are in a really bad spot. And so we're going to, you don't have any money. Your country's destroyed. Just pay us back later. And like we just talked about, that's a bad idea. If we allow them to pay back later and they get conquered, then guess what? You're never going to get that money back. And that is true. And that's the argument between cash only, which would have been the cash and carry, versus the Lend-Lease Act, where we are lending these machines to them and they'll just pay us back eventually. One of the pros of this lending plan, and this is not really militaristic, but the lending is you're going to get more sales, right? If you're selling cars and the only way that you can buy a car is if you have to pay $30,000 out of cash. I don't have $30,000 in my pocket, so I can't buy a car. That means less car sales. But if you allow me to borrow money, if you allow other people to borrow money, and I can make monthly payments, and I can pay you back eventually for that car. Same thing here. You're going to make more money, but you're going to run into some risk here. Just like with the car sale, like maybe the guy doesn't pay back his loan. Whereas if you just did $30,000 cash, you know that you get the sale. You know you've got the money up front. Just like this, if England gets conquered, then we're going to lose some money. So we can look at the map actually of 1812. You can see something similar here. Napoleon has conquered all of Europe, but he can't conquer England. He can't conquer Russia. And eventually, Napoleon will turn his efforts over to Russia after being tired of struggling with England. Hitler runs into the same thing. He can't conquer England. So eventually, he's going to double-cross the Soviet Union and Stalin and turn his efforts over to Russia. And you can see the expand of the German Empire. And it's all going to come down to probably the biggest turning point here in the war is the Battle of Stalingrad. And if you could ever eventually get to, there it is, Stalingrad. So very similar. Remember, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The plight of Napoleon, very similar to the plight of Hitler. Hitler is going to turn his focus over to Russia, and he's going to push back the Soviet forces, and they'll retreat. But one of the tricks that the Soviet Union does as they retreat is practice scorched earth. In the 20th century, we see a move towards total war. And we even saw this during the Civil War with William Tecumseh Sherman. It's basically you do everything possible to win, even if that means destroying your own land. You say, well, why would the Soviet Union burn down their own farms, burn down their own agriculture, burn down their factories? Because as they retreat and the Nazis advance, there's nothing there for the Nazis. There's no food, there's no milk, there's no machines, there's no factories, there's no shelter. And so the further and further that the Nazis get into the Soviet Union, the tougher it becomes. The tougher it is on them, and the further they are from their supply lines, the further they are from the resources. Right, the railroads have been destroyed, so it's even harder to get everything to the Nazis. And the Nazis get really, really deep into the Soviet Union without very much supplies, and a giant storm hits, which happens in the Soviet Union. It's pretty cold there. And eventually, Napoleon retreats. Wait, Napoleon retreats? Yeah, the same exact thing that happens to Hitler deep into the Soviet Union with his advance, cut off from resources in a terrible storm. Napoleon has to surrender and retreat. Same thing happens to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis here at Stalingrad. They are forced to retreat. They get in too deep. The Soviet Union stands up to them, and eventually Hitler has to pull people back. And that marks kind of the beginning of the end here. One of the biggest turning points in World War II. So zooming back over to America. America is sending our workers over. They're becoming soldiers. So who's going to be the Americans? Who's going to be the workers? Women are going to take a major role, stepping from the cult of domesticity, stepping out of the home and becoming factory workers. Rosie the Riveter. There's tons of information. I can't go deep into this, but it's worth looking at. But this is one of those big moments in civil rights history. A big step forward for women, become very active, becoming independent, and getting closer towards equality. Also, A. Philip Randolph will threaten to march on Washington, D.C. if these same opportunities are not given to African Americans. And so African Americans and Black Americans are working in these factories as well. What are they making? They're not making cars. They're making machines, weapons to help with the war effort. The machines, the factories, the industries are completely changed. And we saw this with the coronavirus, where car companies said, guess what? Don't need cars right now. And they started shifting their machinery and equipment with the guidance of the government over to ventilators. Or some companies are not making pillows anymore. They're making masks for Americans. So we see this today. We've seen that then, where the American industrial sector, the private businesses, the corporations that have helped build this country have decided at certain times, like, hey, we're going to stop building stuff for us and we're going to start building stuff for the nation. I can't cover everything. Go to socialstudiesgames.net to check out Unit 8, Depression and War, and then click on Notes. And that's where you'll find notes. Those notes will help you get a 5 on your AP. Those notes will help you if you want to talk about some of the topics that I have not covered. I cannot cover everything. Check out other YouTube videos. Check out other books. But this information, my notes, I go over all the textbooks. I go over the AP guidelines, and I give you quick, succinct bullet point notes of all the topics. So you should do that to get a better understanding, but also to get the topics I've missed. Japan, as we mentioned, Germany was conquered, or Germany under Hitler and the Nazis conquered most of Europe. Japan is conquering most of Asia, and they're moving into Southeast Asia. They're moving into even Australia. At that point, the Americans put a blockade. A blockade is basically we prevent something from getting into a country. We are preventing oil from getting into the country. Without oil or fuel or energy, then you can't fight a war. You can't actually move machines. You can't fight the war, but you can't create the machines. You can't create the steel. You can't create the weapons, the tanks. You can't do it. We are basically planning here in the Pacific Ocean to starve out the Japanese, to stop them from conquering the Pacific. Well, Japan has to respond because Japan needs fuel. They need oil, so they have to respond to our blockade. They plan a surprise attack. They attack Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. May or may not be a surprise attack. You can Google that if you want to know more about it. Their plan was, look, they're going to hit us quick, decisively, and convince us we don't want anything to do with this. Because remember, we're isolationists, we're neutral, we have not gotten involved in the war in Europe, we're not really involved in the Pacific other than a blockade. They think, boom, they smack us around, and the American people, being isolationists and knowing about where we're going, we'll just say, no, we don't want anything to do with it. Well, the opposite happens. We say, oh, no, you didn't. And so we declare war on Japan. Thus, we also have to declare war on their ally, which is Germany. So bam, we are into this war. Now also during this quick period where they have attacked us over Pearl Harbor, they will move us out of the Philippines. And famously, Douglas MacArthur will say, I shall return. But after we've been kicked out, a lot of soldiers are left behind. You have the infamous Bataan Death March, where American soldiers left behind are forced to march 60 miles, starving to death without water. Some pretty horrific things happen in Europe during World War II. Some pretty horrific things happen in the Pacific during World War II. But hey, he's going to come back. Keep your mind on him. So let's go over the back of the playing card. It's just so we know who's fighting who. The good guys are the Allied powers, USA, England, France, and the Soviet Union. There's other countries as well. And they're fighting against the Axis powers, the bad guys, Germany, Japan, Italy. And there are two theaters. There is the war in Europe, and then there is the Pacific War. Let's go back to the European affairs and see how this goes. So America, we're now in the war, right? We got attacked at Pearl Harbor, so we also declared war on Germany. So we will go to North Africa, will be the first place we go to. Now in North Africa here, with the help of the British, we will push the Germans back and the Nazis back and the Italians back, and then we'll go up in through Italy and push up through there. Now at the same time, so we'll kill the fascist leader Benito Mussolini. Actually, the Italian people will kill Benito Mussolini and hang him in the streets in front of everyone to see. That's what happens to fascists. So we are moving up through here. And remember, so we are coming up through here, pushing on the Nazis. We're also receiving, remember, Stalingrad, the Soviet Union's pushing in. Now the question is going to be, well, what about here? England is back alive. How do we get a foothold here in France? And how do we trap the Nazis in? Remember, we're just focusing on Europe. we'll talk about the Pacific in a second. So here we go. We got Africa push up through Italy, take out Mussolini. We're coming in the Soviet Union after Stalingrad's pushing in. If we can get in here, then that's going to be all she wrote. And it pretty much is all she wrote. Time is running out for Mr. Adolf Hitler. And it won't be long. We'll talk about D-Day in the next video. And then also probably build up some of the Pacific as well. Stop beeping at me.